As somebody who is intimately familiar with the designs of all of the 2001 Rahi, I wanted to take the time in this video to defend their design, because although they are not perfect, and in fact I talked about the reasons why you should recognize that maybe your favorite sets, your favorite designs are not in fact perfect, they do exactly what they need to do and nothing more. Strategically, not only from a marketing standpoint, I think this is a really good move on LEGO's part, but let me go ahead and make this video to address why. First things first, we're going to go ahead and actually take a look at all 5 of these original Rahi, starting with the Nui Rama here. This is obviously one of the more easily recognizable types of animals depicted by the Rahi, and of course by this Technic building system, all the way back in 2001. Clearly an insect, and though you can definitely nitpick the fact that, well, it doesn't have 6 limbs, for example, or the mouth is inaccurate or whatever, like, there are things to gripe about for sure. I think this is exactly what it needs to be. I don't see myself improving upon this design, not that that is the intent of what I do in the first place. And again, admittedly, though these sets are not perfect, they do what they are supposed to do, and they do it exceptionally well. I'm actually honestly impressed by the fact that LEGO was able to get 5 of these sets out all the way back in 2001 with 2 of these Rahi in each individual set, because if you've tried doing that yourself, especially in a short amount of time, it's difficult. Now, you know, I can definitely design several Rahi in a day, but that's not where I started by any means, and that's not that I can do that every day, right? But when I look at an animal like this and I see that, oh yeah, it's a mosquito-like insect or a fly-like insect, I look at it and I say, yeah, I can see that. I get it. It is abstract for sure, but that's kind of its strength, if I'm being honest. This came out all the way back in 2001, where we had way less access to Technic parts, and most of the parts involved here are, in fact, from Technic, a handful of Bionicle pieces as well, but it doesn't rely as heavily on those as you might think. I honestly have to commend LEGO for the sheer design and in the display here, because it is done with actually fairly few pieces, basically the minimum that is necessary. It acts as, well, you have a handle, you have a trigger mechanism, and of course you have the mechanism itself, the part that is driven, in this case the wings here. The arms are sort of supplementary, the eyes are supplementary, the mouth or hook, whatever you want to call it, proboscis, is all supplementary stuff to, of course, make it look good, but it is done with minimal parts. The mouth is just 2 pieces, each eye is 3, and the arms are 3 pieces as well. Doesn't need to be that many. I used to ask myself, because I didn't own this set as a kid, but I did have a neighbor down the road that did, you know, this looked alien to me. For one thing, I had just gotten into Bionicle, and I asked myself, well, why does this have something like rubber wing pieces, or at least flexible wing pieces? At the time, it felt so unusual. Even for the first year of Bionicle, those silver pieces really stood out, and the fact that they were not hard plastic like basically everything else seemed a little strange to me, but it's actually intentional. You see, when you use the function on this set, if you were to replace those pieces with solid axles, the tips of those wings cannot touch, they cannot come together, because those axles are rigid. However, using flexible axles like these allows them to actually snap together. It's audible, you can hear it, but not only that, it actually amplifies the amount of force at the end of the wings. The part that you're trying to use to hit masks can hit masks with more force, in a very similar way to the tip of a whip. It's honestly so simple but ingenious, and it's honestly something that we haven't seen much of since. But I love this kind of stuff, because it tells me that there was a lot of thought put into this, and as simple as these wings are, 4 pieces in and of themselves, not of course including the mechanism, they do exactly what they needed to do, and nothing more. When we move on to something like the scorpions here, it's a very similar story, very identifiable from the get-go, and moving forward from this one, you start to get a little bit more abstract. You call this a lizard, sure. I can see it. Here's the thing, and maybe part of that is just being told that it's been a lizard for so long, but I can see it in the sense that, well, it's slender, and yeah, sure, it doesn't have hind legs or a tail, but this is a robotic world at the end of the day. It's a fantasy world at that. It doesn't need to look like our identity of a lizard in the first place. But again, it does exactly what it needs to do. Because here's the thing. How otherwise would the legs look on a set like this? How many pieces would be invested into that build? Especially knowing that in this case here, the treads on the bottom that act as those bottom limbs also in a lot of ways, have their own functionality to them. These are essentially glorified rock'em sock'em robots, and I love it for that reason. The function in the base, of course, being the ability to give you a sort of bob and weave, thanks to the fact that there are shock absorbers in that base, shock absorber in the head as well, for a slight separate function that we used to enjoy the hell out of as kids. But this has honestly been a fantastic design in and of itself. Is it perfect? No, of course not. Could you get closer to a lizard? Sure, I've done so, but again, at what point does it go from being Bionicle or Lego or Technic to being that animal? Because here's the thing that I think a lot of people forget about, and we'll look at a couple more Rahi here in a moment. A lot of people complain about sets like the Terracotta or the Kanera Muwaka, saying they don't look like the animals that they are. And at first, I get it. Here's the thing, as somebody who has built 200 Rahi, it is difficult, near impossible, to get exactly what you want out of Lego's pieces. But you can try, and I implore you to do so. No, rather, when I look at something like the Kanera or the Muwaka, and they tell me, oh, this is a bull, this is a tiger, I can look at that and say, okay, sure. It's hard to say that it's a bull per se. You could just as easily have said it was a goat, but of course bulls tend to be seen as more aggressive. A tiger could just as easily be listed as a cat, but again, tigers are seen to be more aggressive. Clearly what Lego was going for with the design of these sets. They're intimidating, they're large too, right? Bulls are much larger than goats, and of course, again, tigers are much larger than cats. So we get it, and they're exotic, which is always nice when you're thinking about something like a tropical island. So all of this just helps to sort of build into the allure of this place that we were being introduced to as kids. But I also look back at it and I think to myself, well, again, what would we ask for? If instead we lived in the reality where Kanera had 4 legs and a tail, or Muwaka, same, right? What would that look like? Because here's the thing. I think back to the Muwaka, I think back to the Kanera, and we'll hop back over there for a moment so you can see it. My personal favorite of the Rahi from 2001 because of, well, the mechanism for one, it being the first Rahi that I owned actually in 2003, which is a crazy story in and of itself. But I also look at these arms, and admittedly, they're probably my least favorite part of this build. Not because they look bad, they look completely fine, but they have this weird kind of functionality to them that's supposed to sort of disable or at least insinuate the fact that this is disabled as a creature. When you fight the two creatures, you're not trying to knock masks off. I mean, sure, you can do that, but rather you pull the mask stalks out and dislodge the arms. The Rahi drops on the ground, and since it has a slight forward arc in its head movement there, essentially it would just headbutt the ground. Not really. Again, it's not a perfect system, and I think that the Balrog do the disabling function better, even if I prefer this overall build. That said, though, when I ask myself, well, what would the legs look like? Would they be mirrors of these front legs? Because those weren't very satisfactory to me. And look at the amount of parts that goes into them, to be honest. Having that separate function built in, while neat, while cool, it's not strictly necessary by any means. It's sort of just a gimmick at the end of the day. And it's a gimmick, I think, kind of for the worst, but it doesn't hurt the set. No, I look at these sets and I think to myself, the wheels aren't a part of the function. I mean, you can roll them across the ground, sure, and admittedly on this one it's a little bit worse since the wheels kind of flop around, but it does work. It does what it needs to do, and that's it. It's not trying to do anything else. It can't offend anybody because it's not really there to be thought of as anything other than treads. These are robots at the end of the day. But if they had been legs, well, people would still complain. That's the thing I think a lot of people don't understand, is that these are not analogs to the real-life animals, or rather, they're not synonymous with them. They are an analog in a sense that they're not trying to be accurate to the real creatures, just close enough. Something that you can see and say, yeah, okay, I can see it. I mean, you know, bulls aren't red typically, tigers aren't yellow typically, but we're getting there, right? But it's still close enough. It has the claws, it has the teeth, it has the ears, and there are absolutely parts of this. And though I look at a cow and I look at a tiger, I don't think their heads look the same. The heads on these builds, the sculpt of them is kind of a thing of beauty, to be honest. And I can overlook the fact that it's not going to be perfect because it was never intended to be perfect. Legos are not cells, they're not body parts, they're not real. We made them. Because of that, you can never really approach 100% accuracy. It's never a ratio of 1 to 1, and it shouldn't be. You shouldn't strive to make it that way. Some of the most exciting Rahi that I have designed have been Rahi that, honestly, admittedly, have been pretty far off from the source material. I made a fish Rahi for the system Bionicle project. I actually made it long before that, but reworked it for that. That uses a propeller as a back tail because that's fun. Why not, Have something different. Do something different. Embrace the difference and embrace the fact that, again, these are Legos. These are Bionicles. This is an abstract world. It's a fantasy world. It doesn't need to be 100% real, and I think that's a part of its strengths. But also, speaking just from a simplicity standpoint, from a price point, of course, adding those legs, as I mentioned, would be a lot more pieces. It would eat up that parts count, and with that parts count, the budget too. We may have only seen 4 Rahi, or potentially even 3 if all of them were accurate to real-life animals, or more so anyway. We would have obviously paid a lot more for each of those sets too, in the sense that, well, they would have had more parts. If there was a tail lance, sure, it could have been as simple as having these ribbed hoses as tails. What would the legs look like? It's not to say it can't be done, sure, but then we also have to understand how these toys are interacted with, how they're played with. The business end of this toy at the end of the day is the head. The legs are the farthest away from any enemy you might be fighting. So are they actually that important if they're just being dragged behind? Could they catch on carpets when they're being rolled around? Well, the treads kind of mitigate all of that. They do take a decent amount of parts on their own, but since you only have to do it once, it ends up evening out and honestly doing a better job there in that. Because again, if we look at the Terracotta, they don't have a tail, they don't have rear legs of any kind, so the treads make up for that instead and still act as a stylistic part of the build in and of itself. The Manus here, very similar as well. This set is kind of the epitome of doing everything you need to do and nothing more. It also has a disable feature in the front, which I think works a little bit better, but it does have its issues too. And the fact is, it's honestly just heads, arms, wheels, and a shell. That shell being what, like 13 pieces on this example here. The head is only a handful of pieces in and of itself, and the arms are as dead simple as it really needs to be, while being large enough to at least accurately enough hit the masks on your opponent's crab, right? And of course, angled forward at the same level so that the arms are at the same height as the masks, or roughly close so they collide and the punch doesn't go under or over top the mask. That is something else you have to consider when designing sets like these. This just works. Is it perfect? No, of course not. And I think that's another good thing too, because if they had been perfect, I, for one, know I probably would have never given my hand to trying to design these myself, because I would have seen that perfection and been like, I could never approach that. I don't know how long or how many designers' hands touched these sets as they were being designed. I don't know for how long before we knew of Bionicle they were being designed, how many years in development this crab alone may have seen, how many iterations that this body design went through, as one solid piece as it is, sure. But what I do know is the amount of time that I have. I'm not a team of people, but I have as much time in the world as I want, and thankfully knowing that these Rahi are not in fact perfect, that's what I strive for. That's the aspect that I enjoy. When I look at the sculpt of the head of the Kanera, of the Moaka, I look at it and I see it as a thing of beauty. First off, because it has probably my favorite type of function, and I'll talk about that here in a moment before the end of this video. But also just in the sense that, again, that head build takes a decent number of the parts involved in making that set, and the rest of the set is pretty much just slapped together on top of it. It is exactly what it needs to do, and it goes no further so as not to offend, so as not to introduce more parts, more complexity, so as not to cause problems when playing with those sets. The sets do what they need to do in all circumstances. And that's something that's hard to appreciate because we don't always see it that way. A lot of us think about what we want, but we don't think of why it wasn't done. Because trust me, Lego knows too. They don't always get it right, don't get me wrong. But at the very least, when they were designing those first Bionicle sets, they did know what they wanted to get out of it. Everything relied on it in the end. And I'm sure you've heard the story of Bionicle and the role it played in saving Lego, or at least in part, right? So before I end this video, I just want to go ahead and show off another set that acts as a sort of analog to the Moaka, to the Kanera that I designed to showcase that it doesn't need to be that many pieces, but it can be. It is this one right here, the Renami, or the Shallows cat, and this is very heavily inspired by the Wolf Rat from one of the Bionicle games. Don't quote me on which, because I could not tell you, but I do have the files for it. And so when you look at this head here, you'll see it and think, oh yeah, that head looks pretty much identical. There are a couple things, of course, that I changed, but most notably the thing I changed is the fact that it actually has a resetting bite. It's basically the same function as the Muaka and Kanera, but a completely different mechanism. And the sculpt on this is beautiful, if I may say so myself. I really love it. Now, granted, because I technically am not the person to come up with the shaping of this piece, I can't claim the design of the head, but I can at the very least claim the design of the function and making the jaws and everything actually work. Did Lego get there first? I don't know. It wasn't in the file that I found, but at the very least, this works. I just have to assume that as simple as the mechanism I came up with was, maybe Lego stumbled on it too, and we just will never know. Could the Kanera have been smaller? Could the Muaka have been smaller? Absolutely. Could they have been larger? Could they have been more accurate? Absolutely. But I think we live in the good timeline. So that's pretty much it for this video. Before I end it, I just want to go ahead and tease two more builds very quickly because they're not mine, first off. But this one right here is the combination model of the Muaka and Kanera. And just look at this beast. I love it. Yeah, it's missing its claws. This isn't even my picture. But suffice to say, this is masterwork right here. It really is such a good set. First off, it is the inspiration for the shaping of my Kuma, which is actually an alternate model for just Muaka. You don't even need Kanera to make this, which is why I designed it the way I did in the first place. And it also has a resetting bite. All that resetting bite means, by the way, is that the bite in a single motion of the mechanism both opens and shuts and then resets when that mechanism is released, if that makes sense. So you can just repetitively do this forever. Repetitively do that. You get the point. The other thing I wanted to showcase here is that pretty much all of the Rahi from 2001 make combination models that are sort of like larger versions of themselves, with the exception of one. This one right here, the Kehu. And on first glance, I'm not a huge fan of this, but having built it myself and just tweaking the colors, because I think the color is the thing that makes this kind of it's actually a pretty darn good set. This is it right here. Yes, I just hit my microphone. But, oh, let me go ahead and pull you back up to full screen very quickly. But yeah, if you just change out the color scheme to just whatever color you want, honestly, it looks a billion times better. Fill out these with just a couple of panel pieces, and something else I did just to go above and beyond is actually give it a little bit of an air brake function in the wings, because oftentimes in the Imnog game it's displayed with its wings forward. So just ability to transform between those. Very simple linkage mechanism. Nothing fancy going on there. And that's it. That's the whole video. So if you guys did enjoy this one, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, because it does help the channel out. It tells YouTube you want to see more content like this. It's a win-win for everybody. It's also free, so why not? But more importantly, you can join the conversation down in the comments below. This time, I'd really love to know either A, what was your first Rahi, if you ever got one? And that could be Rahi from well after 2001, by the way. Or if you never got one, or you just want to answer a different question, what's your favorite Rahi? It could be a combination model. It could be something that you've made, a mock from somebody that you maybe admire. Or, you know, again, it could be something as simple as one of the Lego sets that they've made. Or an honorary animal. Who knows? Maybe the creator tiger with the butt. That's a weird one. All right. Of course, you want to take the conversation further, you can go ahead and do that over on Discord, which is be down in the description below. Instagram and Patreon are also over there if you want to help support the channel and get some perks. And I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.